So I live in a city, and on the day of writing this, I walked around the city and I found as many moments like this as I could find. Places where posters, ads, announcements, and whatever else had been posted and torn away. I find them almost invariably beautiful. They're accidental compositions made over time by lots of different people with different ambitions and intentions. They tell a very particular type of history, and I think a fairly honest one. It's layers of the past, created partly by people, partly by nature. Often, I imagine that the posters have been put there by outside influence, not necessarily the people of the city. For sure, there has been information about local elections posted here, but also posters for movies made abroad or clothing companies from outside the city. You know, like some marketing company paid for the space and somebody pasted it here, and over time that combination of external influence and provincial communication built a complicated and beautiful composition, a messy artifact of the past N years. It's an honest history, partly because it's illegible. Something as complicated as the history of these locations can never be a simple narrative. It's too complicated, too layered. The messiness results from the intentions of individuals, corporations, the effects of time, weather, cooperation, competition, manipulation, advocacy, and many other elements that come together in human communities of any size. These interactions cannot have a simple history with simple linear narratives. And that, for me, is part of the reason why the work of Mark Bradford is so, engaging. I don't really know a better word for it. They take on the aesthetic similar to these public spaces, but they're created by an individual. But still, that tension between the community and the individual, the public and the private, runs through these works. They engage me at every single level. So I'm going to organize this video by taking a step back from the paintings and engage with them from a distance. Then I'll take a few steps closer and engage with the texture and the process that view reveals. Then I'll take a few steps closer and I'll actually engage with the materials that he uses. And finally, I'll discuss Bradford's charitable work with his foundation Art Plus Practice and tell you how you can engage more with him there, and generally how you can engage with this year's Project for Awesome and lots of other great charities. So let's start by looking at these paintings from a distance. Even though I started this video talking about places like this, the first thing that comes to mind when you see a Mark Bradford work is something bigger than that. They often look like a city seen from a plane or a satellite image. There are things you can understand about the world from this level. The structures of a city, where the major streets flow, where infrastructure is robust and where it wanes. You see the physical organization and the structures of human communities. Which areas form the center and which the margins. You can see the big picture, the big structural stories, the way history and policy has inscribed itself onto the land. In a lot of ways, cities make beautiful compositions, nice geometric lines and vectors for our eyes to follow. But there's obviously a shadow side to this view. It's a perspective that stands above it all, literally. It's impersonal.
It's like when we drop bombs. It's just a map and a little burst until they take pictures on the ground of the people and the homes that they've destroyed and the lives that they've destroyed.
The history of a city that you can see from above is only one of the stories that exists of a city. It's only one perspective. He has created images that address the effect of this perspective directly. His 2006 work called Black Wall Street takes its name from the Tulsa race massacre when a white mob bombed and set fire to the wealthy and largely black district of Greenwood. The bombs were impersonally dropped from above. It's easy to not recognize the human stories from this perspective, which can lead to dehumanization and the resulting violence that this permits. He's also talked in interviews about the helicopter footage from his childhood neighborhood in South Central LA, how this footage during the Watts riots or after the Rodney King verdict has been used to construct a story about this part of the world, how people think that they know about it because of this footage. We've seen it represented figuratively with an easy narrative provided by a helicopter, but without the complexity of human experience below. Bradford has discussed this to explain his use of abstraction. As the art critic Sebastian Smee once put it, you abstract something when it's too complex, too fragmented or too traumatic to reproduce in the form of a single legible image. So Bradford's work speaks both to the impersonal nature of these beautiful compositions and the need to abstract something too complicated for figurative or formal representation. And that's only when we're standing at a distance from the canvases. So now let's take a few steps closer and let the story become even more complicated. When you stand closer, you start to see the way that these compositions are constructed, the process of creation, destruction, of addition and erasure that goes on here. Bradford's work shares some qualities with the gestural abstractions from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. In those paintings, the actions of the artist could be seen through the marks or drips they left behind. The painting is the deposit of a dynamic action done by Jackson Pollock or Joan Mitchell, or a body covered in blue paint rolling around. In Bradford's work, he will layer papers on top of each other and on top of caulking or nylon rope, and then scrape away or sand away the area, pull the rope out, leaving a well, blast the paper with a power washer, or burn it, revealing the layers underneath.
But this is where the rope was, so now that's a memory. So that's a memory of the rope, and the rope now is on the top. So this is just a trace of it.
So at this distance, like a safe 5 or 10 feet from the canvas or plywood or whatever it might be underneath there, we see how that composition is made, how it's layered and torn and burned and ripped, similar to those well-used billboards that we saw around town. Again, this is Bradford using the practice of abstraction, in this case gestural abstraction, in a really complicated way. In an interview with Anita Hill, he said, "Abstraction for me, I get it. You go internal. You turn off the world. You're hermetic. You channel something. No, I'm not interested in that type of abstraction. I'm interested in the type of abstraction where you look out at the world, see the horror. Sometimes it is horror. And you drag that horror, kicking and screaming, into your studio, and you wrestle with it, and you find something beautiful in it. The laughter in between the crying." His compositions seem to have those geometric lines or formal qualities of cities and grids from far away, but up close, those lines are messy. The edges aren't clean. There's a struggle between creation, erasure, and recovery. The work is a deposit of some actions that do not have easy narratives. The part of that quotation that strikes me is that he does say he wrestles with the horror until he finds a way to frame it. He wrestles with it until he finds beauty in it. This isn't about telling a story or finding a way to reframe the conversation. This is about keeping it messy and complicated and unsure and constantly resisting the simple ways of looking at things. And the narratives he proposes only get more complicated the closer we get to the canvas. There are whole other layers of meaning when we look at the material that he uses. So let's take a couple steps closer and look at that material. Early in his career, Bradford famously used end papers in the construction of his compositions. And when I started doing research for this paper, I admit, I didn't know what end papers are. So, luckily, I can just quote the artist directly. In an interview with Michael Auping, he explains, "When you are doing a permanent wave, you wrap the hair around a curler, and you also wrap the end papers. They keep the hair flat and even around the curlers and rods. They are very durable, even when wet, and they absorb the permanent wave solution and keep the solution even over the hair. They also protect the hair from too much heat in the hairdryer." And I should note here that, of course, I didn't know what an end paper is before researching this video. That's probably why he uses them. They're not there for me, the white boy from the suburbs. They are there to carry meaning for the communities of the beauty shop. They carry meaning for that community, and they're there for me to stop and listen and learn. Bradford grew up working in his mother's beauty shop, and these end papers were easily available, cheap, and they came in boxes of 1,000. They allowed him to make inexpensive mistakes that would have been impossible if he were using oil paint, a medium he associates with European artists. And he's got a point there. American artist John Chamberlain made the same point, that oil paint is European. We've got other stuff. America is all about other stuff. The things we invent, the things we use. That's why American art looks different. It isn't depicting something in paint. It's assembling our materials into a portrait of who we are. And the end papers point again to that tension I mentioned at the start of this video, the tension between community and the individual, the public and the private. Bradford often talks about the formative experience of working in the beauty shop, how the conversations were intensely private, but how the space itself was a gathering place outside the home. In an interview with Anita Hill, he describes the beauty shop as both public and private. What I meant by public is that it's like people at train stations, airports, bars, nightclubs, all places I like, by the way. It creates this bond, like at a concert. We're here for this amount of time, sharing something, and then everyone goes back to their private spaces, their homes. But for that moment, when they're in that public space, magic can happen. Everybody is in conversation, and they share and reveal things. It's a public space, and it's an intimate private space. The end papers evoke that space while also evoking the artist's personal story, and they have the metaphorical associations of absorption, durability, and protection. The material carries a lot of meaning here. More recently, he's been using the types of papers that are posted around his city, the stuff that might appear on a location like this. In his installation entitled Sexy Cash, he used flyers in his composition. He noticed that in these places, you can tell a lot about what's going on in the neighborhood. In particular, he noticed some posters offering sexy cash to buy up real estate in the area. And this is exactly the type of human story that doesn't appear in those aerial views of the city. These posters bring with them the stories of trade routes, of exploitation. These posters are external forces that, as he put it, have the intention of pillaging, plundering, giving 10 cents on the dollar to people who are in a desperate situation. So Bradford appropriates these posters along with the exploitation they embody to build artwork that wrestles with the history of manipulation and colonization. He has this great rant I found on YouTube, I'll post a link in the description below, where he says that he's not interested in where his materials come from. He's only interested in where they're going.
Taking humble stuff and demanding that that humble stuff has access and a shot at anything they want.
In short, at the zoomed in level of material, these paintings get personal. They get autobiographical. They're about a very specific neighborhood with a very specific artist, but they're abstracted into something public, something universally engaging. Bradford's wrestling with these materials and with his history and finding something beautiful provides us with metaphors and an artwork to discuss and struggle with ourselves. But he's under no illusion that the presence of these paintings on the wall of a gallery will resolve much. His art is political, and so are his actions. In 2015, he founded Art Plus Practice, which serves foster youth and supports contemporary arts. The campus for Art Plus Practice has an exhibition space for public programs and a space for transitioning foster youth to find mentorship and help. The charity they work with is called First Place for Youth, and that's the charity that I'm promoting in this year's Project for Awesome. I'll put a link to the website in the description and a link for the Project for Awesome. Please go and check out the P4A live stream and vote for your favorite charity and video. Thank you for watching.